Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju and Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
I don't know, Dre. I think we should move on from this one. Why don't you take it off with us on this next subject? Kind of a multi-layered discussion right here. A lot going on. Similarly, involves troubles in D.C., so a little bit of a tie-in.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Jay Gruden lost his job. The next person in a different sport that might lose their job, though, is Daryl Morey. So GM of the Houston Rockets. And it's interesting. It all happened over a tweet. So I guess to kick this section off, what are some of the most regrettable things that you've said or posted online, Ju-Ju? Something that you're just like, oh man, I wish I could take that back.
Basically, anything that high school Julian ever posted, said, or did. I remember a few years ago in college, I just went through a purge of everything related to high school Ju-Ju. Anything that person is dead, buried, and gone, and only shows up in the occasional awkward moment that is the life and times of Julian Isaac Martinez.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat, right? Like a few years ago, I did the same thing as I was thinking, and I was like, man, a lot of these old Facebook posts and tweets are popping up for a lot of famous people, and I doubt anybody's digging up dirt on me. But I was
now you're in the public sphere, man.
I know, I'm in the public sphere, and so now I'm like, oh shoot, I need to go back and just delete all of the stupid stuff I said. And
at least you're not on Twitter.
I know, and well, that's exactly what I think is going through Daryl Morey's mind right now. So to give a little bit of a background, into what's happening is Daryl Morey decided to chime in and posted literally just 6 words on Twitter, and it said, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong," or 6-7 words, however much it is, right? And so what's going on right now is Hong Kong, there's a lot of protests about sort of the Chinese government's overreach into, Hong Kong is supposed to be sort of its own separate city-state. And Daryl Morey tweeted this, and immediately I think he realized, shoot, I need to take this down because this is stupid. And now the Chinese government is pissed at not only the Rockets, but the NBA as a whole, and it could have a whole lot of different implications.
Well, one of the big ones about it is the financial implication. There was a lot of discussion on this. How much money annually does the NBA profit off of their business with China? And some numbers that I have seen thrown out there when it comes to it. So it's roughly about $750 million of revenue per year in Chinese dollars, with unlimited growth potential because of the sheer population in China that's obviously well documented. And then for the Rockets franchise alone, and the reason why you say that maybe Daryl Morey's a little bit on the hot seat aside from their postseason struggles, $300 million in merchandising the Rockets make from the Chinese yearly, estimated rough number. But that's because when you consider the Rockets, prior to that tweet, were China's most beloved franchise, given their extensive history when it came to players like Yao Ming, integrating him into the NBA. You could argue that he was a bigger draw than Kobe in the 2000s just because of a whole country was rallying behind one player. So now you can make an argument the Rockets could be the most hated team in China for the next few decades.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and then the thing that also, right, so they had Yao Ming, who is a national treasure in China, right? The Chinese, they're really serious about their sports, especially the Olympic sports, but any sport that's really big, if they have an athlete that's really good at it, they 100% stand behind them. And so, of course, they stand behind Yao Ming, but Houston itself has a very large Asian population as well, right? So I travel to Houston a lot. I have, family that's there, and I am half Asian. And so there's a big, Chinese population down there in Houston. So, I mean, even just in America, there's a big Chinese following, right? And now Chinese Americans and, Chinese are very different, right? But it still has a major impact.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this is kind of an interesting thing, too, that we can add this to our listeners' day when it comes to listening about this subject. So you've actually been to China before. You did a study abroad there years ago. From all indications, you had a great time there. But what were some kind of noticeable things that you noticed were very different from the United States? Culturally, just your daily going about business?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that the way China is. And in fact, it's one of my favorite places that I've ever been. And I encourage a lot of people to travel there. But in a lot of ways, it also feels a little bit strange. And you could definitely tell that it's very different from the United States. So right away, as we were being prepped and briefed of, hey, we're going to go over there, here's what's going to happen. We were told if you have a laptop or you have a cell phone, right, the Chinese government will take it as you're going into their country, and they may possibly even bug it or download software or spyware possibly into your laptops, into your cell phones. And so we were warned right away that if you want anything to stay as it is, as far as electronics, you better just leave it home. And so I ended up actually buying a separate cell phone and turned on one of my older ones that I wasn't using anymore and used that one in China. So that's immediately one thing that you look for. Some of the other things is the Chinese government is very serious about protecting their businesses, right? And having, sort of government influence on what's going on. So they're starting to become a more free market society. But at the same time, they're very serious when it comes to things. And if they don't like the way that you're doing something, they will 100% shut you down, right? So Facebook is not allowed over there. There's a lot of other online sites that you just cannot simply access. There's a lot of American, but other countries around the world, right? Some European companies that are just not allowed to sell products over there. And it's all what the government says. And sort of tying into the whole Hong Kong thing is the Chinese government, they also like to have just pretty much total control over the population. And so they even recently made a super camera that I think they have, it's either in Shanghai or Beijing, that can zoom in for like 10 miles or something. So they can literally, with this camera, find somebody that's 10 miles away and have perfect resolution and be able to see their face perfectly. It's insane. And the Hong Kong people really don't like that. And they don't want that rule just because Hong Kong used to be a British territory. So Hong Kong is slightly different from mainland China. They're sort of their own city-state. They sort of operate on their own. And what happened is there was a proposed law which did not pass that would have allowed for the extradition of criminals to mainland China to be prosecuted by mainland China, basically giving mainland China more power in Hong Kong. And that's why the Hong Kong citizens didn't like it.
I see. The main pushback when it comes to this whole issue is what's going on. It's not just like China is at war with the NBA. A lot of U.S. citizens have little problems with the way the NBA has handled this whole situation as well.
Mm-hmm.
On our side of things, people have kind of been at odds with the NBA because at the first onset of Daryl Morey's tweet, it seemed as though the NBA was a little bit of kowtowing to China's rule here. And that wouldn't be completely unfounded when it comes to the way that other businesses have worked with China in the past. A couple of notable American companies that have kind of bended to the will of China, Delta Airlines, Activision, Apple, have also made some decisions over little things like a Taiwanese emoji popped up. China said they didn't like it. Apple got some major pushback from it. Do you think the NBA did the right thing with the way they're doing this? Because now you see Adam Silver, he's out there. He's standing with Daryl a little bit because, in a way, he's there to protect his free speech. But then I also see stuff like this pop up. So there was fans at both the Philadelphia game and the game in Washington having free Hong Kong shirts taken away from them on American soil. That's ridiculous. I mean, this is a tough discussion to speak about because there's a lot of political ramifications. There's a lot of multi-layered concepts such as free speech, free market, everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But if this was happening in Beijing and the Chinese said, yeah, we don't want you wearing that in a shirt, fine. But to tell an American citizen on American soil in Washington, D.C., of all places, that he can't wear a shirt, ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so here's the interesting thing is that the NBA is, I think, notorious for allowing their players to be outspoken and really speak their mind, right? I know there's been a whole lot of issues that go on with the players kneeling during the football games, right? But you get a little bit more pushback in the NFL and the owners have a little bit more say and control as well as the league. But in the NBA, right, players have been very outspoken, right? LeBron James and many others have straight up come out and said like, hey, here's my opinions. And the NBA encourages that. And
yeah, but sorry to interject, but they've been notoriously silent when it comes to this regard. So the Lakers are literally playing in China here. So we were listening to this probably on a Saturday. So as of Thursday, the Lakers were playing in China And I haven't heard a peep from LeBron James about this subject.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think you're right, is that we've been so outspoken, and we're used to the NBA being a little bit more outspoken as far as coaches, right? Even you have your Steve Kerrs, Greg Popovich, players included. And now it's sort of a little bit silent. And I think it's because people don't know what to do, right? When you're talking about the United States, and this is one of the things that I love most about the United States, is we can openly criticize the U.S. government however we want to see it, and you don't really run the risk of losing your job, right? Like, there might be some strange instances where it could happen, but most of the time you're not going to be told that, hey, you're not going to be allowed to play here anymore or anything like that. But now you're dealing with a country that has a lot of power, right? Like, we sort of were saying possibly as much as $750 million per year in revenue, right, for the NBA, which is a large chunk, which I think we could even get into a little bit further a little bit later. And they have so much say, and it is expected to grow, right? Like, China, right now you have your big populations in like Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, some of those really big cities, but even their smaller cities are starting to grow, and they like the product that the NBA has. But China, 100%, if they want, can say nobody will watch NBA basketball anymore in China, and they will end all the agreements, and they will literally throw people in jail for wearing an NBA t-shirt or jersey or anything that says Houston Rockets on it.
Can you believe that the NBA is involved in such a large political discussion? But yes, the main thing about it is a lot of this comes off so hypocritical, the silence from the NBA. Mostly because, yes, they are very outspoken. And the NBA has made it a point to be so involved in social issues, maybe too far involved. We've seen them take away all-star games from Charlotte because of the transgender bathroom issue. We've seen them go out of their way to rename the owner position to ambassador just because of LeBron James making them kind of bend to his will when he threw out claims like the NFL owners have a slave owner mentality. So now that you have legitimate human rights violations involved in another country that you're making millions/billions of dollars off of, sorry, we can't talk about this. And I don't expect these players to be experts in Chinese politics, certainly like Steve Kerr, when he was even said it in his interview. I'm not an expert in Chinese politics. I know a little bit, but not much. I understand that. But if you're going to be so vocal about these type of issues and then so silent when it comes to your bottom line, it stands out. It's noticeable.
No, it definitely is. And that's the thing. I don't know necessarily what the right thing to do is for the NBA. So I'm not going to act like I've got it all figured out and I know the magic bullet, because it's not simple. I think they need to encourage free speech, right? They've been doing it all along, and they've had people that have been outspoken. You might as well let people speak their mind. And I think the NBA has to realize that, hey, if we let people speak their mind, right, it's possibly going to start costing us some major money. And I mean, it sucks, right? But like, they've set a precedence in that, hey, we're going to let our players and coaches and, anybody affiliated with the NBA really can be outspoken about their beliefs and what they view as being injustices or anything like that. And so I think they almost have to continue it, right? Otherwise, then you really are seen as, oh, well, now all you care about is the money, which that is ultimately, I think, what the NBA cares about. But yeah, it's a really tough situation. It's hard. And me personally, what I do if I'm the NBA is I try to tell the Rockets, hey, fire Daryl Morey so that we could apologize to the Chinese. Like, that's honestly what I would do.
Well, here's the thing that you put yourself into a corner with if you make that decision. Daryl Morey becomes an advocate for free speech. His name is going to be plastered everywhere. It honestly would turn into a big political discussion in this nation, just knowing how the mainstream media works. And if Daryl Morey, I don't think Daryl Morey ever saw himself becoming this high of a figure in U.S. China international relations. But honestly, he would become a big figurehead for this if the Rockets decided to fire him, and that might have ramifications for them on U.S. soil. So now you're not worried so much about Chinese dollars. You have to worry about the American consumer. And honestly, I think that might be more important, because who's going to these games?
Yeah, I mean, that you're right. The American consumer is still the number one purchaser or buyer of the NBA's product, right? Whether that's jerseys or it's actual live TV, right? The products that the NBA sells is primarily going to the US consumer. And you're 100% right. Like I could see people pushing back saying, hey, no, Daryl Morey has the freedom of speech here in this country and does not deserve to be fired for that tweet.
Yeah, because at that point, what are we saying? So free speech exists everywhere except Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess what do you think the NBA should do then, Ju-Ju? Do you have an idea
what do I think the NBA should do?
Mm-hmm.
It's tough, but I think it wouldn't be completely irresponsible for them to pull back a little bit on their Chinese relationship until they can negotiate a better deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because I think this could have significant pushback for the Chinese government if they continue to deprive their citizens. Obviously, we're seeing the protests already become such a issue. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to act too like I know everything about Chinese politics myself.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're depriving citizens of the one thing of joy that they have in their lives, which maybe is just turning on a Rockets game, a Lakers game, whatever,
mm-hmm.
your citizens are not going to be happy. And look back at any country, any history of a nation, doesn't end well for the governments in charge when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'll throw that out there. Man, I never foresaw the NBA being the reason behind World War III. I gotta say.
Honestly, like bombs might start flying over this topic. But I think, so we've talked a lot about, the impact of Daryl Morey and the Houston Rockets. And Daryl Morey's done a fantastic job making Houston a contender every year. Like, obviously, they've never gotten over the hump. But I think there's a lot more to it as well, that if the Chinese market just 100% disappears, there's thoughts that the salary cap, which is tied directly to the amount of revenue that the NBA brings in, could also decrease. And that could be a 10 to 15% decrease in the NBA salary cap. So not only does that impact how the level of talent that you could have on your team, right, coming up into the future, but then that also impacts what your max salaries are. So your max salaries are always calculated as a percent of your cap. So 0 to 6 years is 25% of the cap, 7 to 9 years is 30% of the cap, and then 10 plus years is 35% of the cap. So this year, right, like a player like a D'Angelo Russell, who was an all-star, ended up getting a max salary spot. He's only getting $25 million just because he's only been in the league for less than 6 years. And the salary cap is currently, I think, at $101 million, right? Whereas your players like your LeBron Jameses and players like that are closer to your $35, $36 million mark. But now if there's a 10 to 15% decrease, right, now you go from being a $25 million per year to $21 million per year is the max that you can get. So it's going to have mostly a big impact on your upcoming free agents, right? Your DeMar DeRozans, Anthony Davis, Kyle Lowry, Gordon Hayward, and those guys.
Another thing we didn't even mention too, Klay Thompson, his name has been thrown around, D-Wade, all them, because they have these big shoe deals with Chinese companies as well. They're impacted a little bit by this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like an onion. It's like an ogre, in fact. There's a lot of layers right here to this concept. We're trying to peel them back and see what's going to happen. And maybe it's just a little bit too early in this discussion to really know what the net result is going to be. And I don't even think we're going to have any solidified answers when it comes to this for another few years. I will throw it out there, though. I get why you're focusing so much on China, because not only in sports, but in other forms of media, like obviously the Marvel movies are really big. Film is really big, too, when it comes to the Chinese dollars. But if the NBA is so focused on making this a global game, why not focus on other markets, other emerging markets that aren't causing nearly as many issues, and that you legitimately negotiate? Because right now it doesn't even feel like a negotiation or a back and forth between the NBA and China. It seems more like China dictating what's going on with an American-based company.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think now that you mention it, you're starting to lean me towards more of your stance, right? So I had said that I personally would come out and say, hey, look, we got to get rid of Daryl Morey. But you are right, is that they could grow it possibly, right? Like in your Indias and some of your other places, right? There's some Middle Eastern countries that are starting to come up, or some countries in, Eastern Europe that have previously been poor but are starting to develop some.
Ton of African nations.
African nations, right? And so maybe if you could start to grow your brand a little bit more elsewhere, you can also say, hey, no, we stood behind our people for freedom of speech, right? And we stand for freedoms everywhere around the world, and we do stand for social justice regardless of where we are, and we're even willing to take the several $100 million hit in our bottom line as long as we can stand for people all around the world. And so from a strategy standpoint, that might be the other thing. I'll stick to my Daryl Morey stance just because I said it earlier in the show, but I could see the NBA saying, hey, you know, that our strategy will be that instead. We'll take the $700 million hit now, and hopefully we'll make it back in some of these other countries.
All right. Are you ready to talk about the game actually on the court now? Because I love this discussion, and I think it's going to definitely be a constantly developing issue as we go. But there's only so many more ways we can go about this while we're still learning about the fallout from it, really.
Yeah. So I guess one last thing before we wrap up on this topic, and I'm going to make it real quick, is when I was actually out there in China, just to show you how big of an impact China has, like we were saying, on even American companies, and we talked about the Marvel movies. So in China, in order to be able to show Iron Man 3, I believe it was, when we were out there, Iron Man 3 had just come out, right? And it was big here in the United States. Iron Man's been one of Marvel's biggest, you know, sellers, right? And in order for them to be able to show Iron Man 3 in theaters in China, and I kid you not, we went to a Chinese theater to watch it, they had to add an extra scene at the end of Iron Man 3, right? So Marvel always has their post-credit scenes. There was an extra one that had Chinese doctors being the ones to operate on Iron Man, right? So on Tony Stark to help him get rid of the shrapnel that was in his chest and help keep him alive. And basically to say, China is the reason why Iron Man still lives. And it's crazy. Like, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. But that's how much influence they have and how much power, because there's such a big market. And they said, if you do not add this extra scene in which China saves Iron Man, right, or at least Chinese citizens are the ones saving Iron Man, you will not be allowed to show Iron Man in our theaters.
And that's just what I'm talking about. I just don't agree with that concept. I guess whatever Disney, the NBA, or whatever it has to do to get that bag, but morally, I guess I'm opposed to it right now.
Yeah, no, it's just crazy. 100% true story. But yeah, we gotta move on. But I think this is one of those big issues that I personally think is not being talked about enough. But I'm sure we'll hear more to come, you know, even in the next few years. Like,
I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about it here next week too. The way that this